I'm Steve Willey, Backwoods Solar Electric Systems. We work with electric power systems for remote home sites where there's no other power available. Most of what we install is photovoltaic, that is solar electric panels, because sunshine is the most available source of energy. This type of system costs from $2,000 to $15,000 complete. When a home site has a possibility of generating power from running water, the same power or even more can be produced for a lot lower price and without waiting for sunny days. A hydroelectric power system typically costs about $750 for the actual hydro generator and turbine, somewhere between $400 and $1,000 for batteries. Automatic charge controls, $128 to $400, and the largest and best power inverter, the 2,000 watt trace, is $1,090, plus a few odd wires, fuses, and connectors as needed. So the total, excepting the pipeline cost, which can be major, is $2,500 to about $3,300. So the costs are a lot lower if you have a site that's suitable for hydroelectric generation. These sites are pretty rare compared to the people buying solar. I think we sell one hydro unit for probably somewhere around 50 homes that are set up with solar. Let's take a look at just what kind of water and site requirements are required to make a hydro system work well. The hydro system has the same basic components as this large commercial system, starting with a place high up in elevation where you take the water in, with some kind of a screen or provision for filtering the water at the intake to the pipe so that debris, logs, leaves, fish, etc. cannot go into the pipe. The pipe carries the water downhill for some distance, the main object of which is to carry the water down elevation-wise to where it picks up pressure in the pipe. On a home-scale hydro system, the intake looks more like this, and you can see the small volume of water that's required to operate the pipeline and the turbine. The intake screen is often as simple as a piece of screen, perhaps a submerged well casing, or in this case a garbage can with a screen in it, just enough to make sure that nothing gets into that pipeline. The downhill pipeline itself, properly known as a penstock, is most often PVC pipe from 2-inch diameter up to 6-inch diameter. The hydro generator itself is usually placed in a small shed out of the weather, and this is about the amount of water that passes through it. The amount of water required to operate the hydro system depends on how much power you want, but also depends on the amount of height you have from the upper end of the pipe to the lower end of the pipe, the amount of vertical drop you get regardless of the distance of travel. The more height you have, the more pressure is developed in the water, and the less volume of water is required. Also, the smaller the diameter of the pipe that's required. So it's really to advantage economically as well as performance to get the most drop over the length of your pipeline as you can possibly get on your property, or by agreements to have an easement perhaps on property above. Conversely, the less elevation change you have over the pipe, the more water is required. Power can be generated with as little as 2 or 3 feet if great amounts of water are poured through 10, 15, 20-inch pipes for that type of height. So to keep the costs down and the permits down so you don't have to dam up the whole Columbia River and run it through your machine, you want to get as much height as possible. The practical minimum limit for the most basic type of system would be about 30 feet of drop from the intake of the pipe to the bottom where the hydro generator is positioned. It is possible with a different type of unit and a slightly larger pipe to generate power with as little as 20 feet of drop. A typical system with perhaps 50 or 60 feet of drop elevation change over the length of the pipeline, and that pipeline can be perhaps 1,000 feet long. I've seen some up to 1,500 feet long, 3 or 4-inch pipe. But typically 50 or 60 feet, you'll be using from 20 to 40 gallons per minute. which is like the flow from a fast bathtub faucet, not a great deal of water. In fact, until about 10 years ago, these smaller hydro systems on these smaller creeks were not considered practical. They were thought not to generate enough power to be of any use to anyone. But since the last 10 years, people installing photovoltaics on their home, all they could get was a small amount of power, and that only in good weather. So a whole technology has developed, as is evident in our catalog, to allow people to make good practical use of much smaller amounts of electricity than was previously thought possible. Using special appliances like the compact fluorescent lights that I happen to be sitting under right now, and the Sunfrost refrigerator cuts the power consumption of a home down to about 10 or 20% of what a typical home would use, less than 1 kilowatt hour per day. This is possible because major heating appliances such as hot water and cook stoves and clothes dryers are gas-fired, and a certain amount of solar is used in heating the house, and wood and gas, whatever, to free electricity up from the really wasteful large heat-producing appliances. The first 20 pages of our catalog emphasize saving energy and how to make a small amount of energy go further in your home, with solar homes demonstrating that a high degree of comfort and practicality can be achieved by homes on less than 1 kilowatt hour a day. Some of the small streams and creeks that could just spin out a few watts on a continuous basis were looked at again in a new light. In addition to conservation, a lot of the technology from solar electric homes has been applied to hydropower. In the older days, hydropower generated AC directly. If you had one of these smaller creeks we've been talking about that put out, say, 70 watts on a 24-hour-a-day basis, you couldn't do an awful lot. You could light a 60-watt bulb, or nowadays make that 3 or 4 18-watt highly efficient bulbs, but you certainly couldn't run a washing machine or a toaster or a vacuum cleaner because they took more watts than the creek was capable of producing. But the same thing was true of solar panels, and the sun only shone 8 hours a day. So every solar electric system charges batteries. The batteries store up power when it's available and supply it when the sun doesn't shine, or in faster, larger quantities for running a bigger appliance. The same thing is true of hydro. The hydro systems that we install generate DC and charge into batteries. They do it 24 hours a day, quite an advantage over solar, and they do it whether the sun shines or not, as long as the water flows in your creek and doesn't dry up or freeze over. 24 hours a day, 75 watts into a battery amounts to quite a substantial amount of power, and it can be withdrawn on a faster basis through an AC inverter for running appliances like a washing machine, toaster, hairdryer, vacuum cleaner, television, VCR. Run most of them at once, because the power inverter takes what's stored in the battery and delivers it when you need it, not just at the rate that the water power is producing it. So the balance of the hydroelectric system is pretty much the same as a solar-powered system, which is described in the first 20 pages of our catalog and in several books listed in the back of our catalog. I won't go into that in quite so much detail in this tape because that is explained in the introduction to solar tape that we have. But we will see all of this equipment in some of the houses we're going to visit. So to review, we want to have a very minimum of elevation change over the length of your pipe of 20 feet, preferably up toward 50, 60, 70, 80, maybe 100 feet. It's not necessary on this small type of system to go up as high as 200 feet, but that would probably be the maximum that would be practical to use. The pipe size that you will use will be somewhere between a large of 6 inches for that minimum 20 foot of drop, down to a small of 2 inches. 1.5 works, but it usually compromises the performance a little bit for the higher pressure systems. The longer your pipe is required, the larger you want to go with the diameter to avoid friction and loss of pressure over the length of the pipe. By the way, white PVC pipe is the preferred type. These are 20-foot sections that plug together and glue together at the seams. Very easy to carry into the site and put together. The black coiled pipe has internal splices that are smaller than the pipe and restrict the water. What's more, they catch on twigs and other things that may get through your screen filter. They turn sideways and catch on those splices, and then stringy matter and other plant matter gets in there and catches and forms a larger clog. If your pipe is buried, that can be a very expensive thing to find out where it is and cure it. Point about the pipeline. It is not a good idea to start with a larger pipe and go to a smaller one as you go downhill. Some people believe this increases the pressure. It does not. Pressure in a pipeline is measured as 2.2 feet of drop for every pound of increased pressure. If you have 220 feet, you have 100 pounds pressure at the bottom. And that's all there is to it. Big pipe, little pipe, doesn't make any difference. It's the same pressure 2 feet under your bathtub as it is 2 feet under the ocean. If you do start with a large pipe and go to a small one as you go downhill, you'll have several reducers in that pipe. Once again, a place that clogs will accumulate. I've seen several of them happen, and they're very difficult to locate and cure once the pipeline is buried. Let's visit some of the families using HydroPower and study the equipment as we go. Debbie Jordan in the Bonners Ferry area built a cabin next to a very large stream with very little drop. She used a 4-nozzle Harris Hydro to make use of a larger volume of water at her minimum of about 20 feet of head or drop in her penstock pipe.
Originally it was just going to be a small cabin, and then as I started working on it, it ended up being a regular household.
From a small pool in the very large creek, water is taken in first through a small screen and then into the trash can that she's buried at water surface height. Inside the can is a screen that further filters the water, preventing pebbles, leaves, and other things from entering into the pipe. This has to be cleaned very frequently in fall when leaves are coming down, but not so much the rest of the year. The larger the surface area of the screen, the less often it needs to be cleaned or would clog up. This is not the ideal site for installing a pipe alongside the creek. Rocks have prevented her from burying it. Although Debbie's done quite a bit of digging to get it around obstacles, there were still some points where the pipe had to go up and over large boulders, creating a high spot which could trap air. There she drilled small holes to let the air out, and they can be later plugged with stainless steel screws.
Yeah, each fall when the leaves fall and there's branches and stuff, I'm going to plan to put it on top of the pipe so there'll be some kind of insulating value.
Lower end of the pipeline, Debbie has built a very attractive shed which houses the equipment and keeps it out of the weather. This is a Harris HydroPower unit with 4 nozzles, one at each 90 degree around the wheel, and a meter showing the power being generated. Harris hydroelectric systems, available in 12 or 24 volt, are the most common small hydro available and perhaps the best price today. Essentially, it's an automobile alternator with a Pelton wheel attached to the shaft. 4 nozzles are arranged around the shaft, shooting a jet of water into the wheel, causing the alternator to spin at RPMs anywhere from 600 up to over 2,000 in the higher pressure installations. As the pressure is increased, only 2 nozzles or perhaps only 1 nozzle is necessary. Debbie's house was located several hundred feet from the lower end of the pipe where the hydro is located. So number 4 copper wire, which costs about $1 per foot of run, since you use 2 of them at about 50 cents a foot for the wire. 1 wire for plus, 1 for minus, up to the house. And that wire is practical for about 300 or 400 feet maximum without going to some special transmission features. So it's real desirable to have your house as close as possible to the bottom of the hydro, or vice versa, locate the hydro close to the house, if that's possible. If not, we have some other ways to get around it, which we'll see at some of the other visits. The wires going to the house first go through a charge control to limit the charge to the batteries to the amount of power that the batteries need, cutting off the charge when they're full, also indicating on meters how much power the Pelton is producing and what the voltage of the battery is. After that, the power goes into the batteries, and from the batteries it can be used as either AC or DC power in the house, just as would be used in a solar house and somewhat like a conventional home. A set of 660 amp-hour surplus industrial or telephone type batteries, 6 individual cells making 12 volts. It's a smaller set than you would have for solar power because the hydro recharges it constantly. smaller of the two charge controls that can be used with hydro. This is the Mark III solar control shown in our catalog, priced around $100. The upper meter indicates the battery voltage, and the lower one shows how much power is coming in from the hydro. And there is a light on the left to indicate that it is presently charging the battery. When the batteries are full, this device will automatically shut off the charge or cycle it on and off as needed to maintain a full battery. The only other piece of equipment that is required is an inverter. This is a Trace 2000 watt inverter that Debbie has installed. It provides AC power to run her vacuum cleaner, radio, television, and other appliances that she will have in the house. Pretty conventional. It's got AC wiring all around, as well as provision for a few DC wires. And with the hydro charging a small set of batteries full time and running an inverter, she'll have a pretty comfortable amount of power for appliances. This is a Harris HydroPower generator to get a little closer look at what Debbie was using. This is a standard Delco car alternator hooked up into an aluminum base to contain the water, with a pipe manifold that comes with it usually, because it's fairly difficult to install on site when it forms a complete ring. And each entrance, each nozzle, shoots at the wheel to spin the alternator, and has its own, all except for one, has its own shut-off valve so that you can turn the water on or off to each nozzle. This way, if your volume of water decreases in the drier part of the year, you can still maintain your pressure and run it at a lower power level by shutting off certain nozzles. Also, if you have slightly different size nozzles in each one, the number of combinations of flow rate that you can select is greatly increased. Inside the unit is a curved cupped wheel called a Pelton wheel. Each nozzle shoots water into these cups, the impact of which drives the wheel to spin. The wheel ideally spins at about half the speed of the jet of water. That means the water bounces off the wheel with the energy of the water completely removed. As the water hits the retreating wheel, it bounces off, and should bounce off as much as possible such that the water is stopped. That means all the energy is withdrawn from the water and it just drops away from the wheel at the ideal setting. It runs in a horizontal position like this, and on the front is a meter showing the amount of power being generated and an adjustment for the field current in the unit. This adjustment allows you to determine how much power is generated at each RPM. In other words, you can put a greater load on the unit. It'll slow down against the jet of water, try to put out more power. If you load it too much, it slows down too much, and the water does not push it efficiently anymore. Your power rate falls off. If it's loaded too little, it spins freely with very little resistance, and again doesn't generate much power. So there's a point in the middle here where you tune this to get the maximum power. Just by turning the dial until the meter reads highest, you can adjust for your maximum efficiency. Wiring for the Harris hydro turbine is very simple. Only two wires come from the machine, a positive and a negative, to go toward the house and charge the batteries. Depending on the distance to the house and the amount of power expected to be generated, these wires are spliced to a larger gauge wire. Usually number 4 copper is sufficient to go the distance to the house without losing a substantial quantity of power being generated. Unlike solar or wind, hydro generates at a low rate of power over long periods of time. They're left on constantly 24 hours a day, set to just above the rate of power that's necessary. With this type of equipment, the negative wire goes on directly to the battery, whereas the positive wire goes first to the charge control and then to the battery. Always remember to add a fuse to any wire connected to the positive of your battery. Here's a better view of the charge control used in Debbie's house. You can see the upper meter shows battery voltage, gives a low area in the red zone, normal in the middle, and high in the green. Constantly being charged by hydro, the battery will remain somewhere in the bottom of the green area, around 13.5 volts. The lower meter shows amperes. That is the flow of current coming in from the hydro. How fast is it being charged? From 0 up to 15. When used for hydropower, this regulator is usually best limited to 10 amps or less. We'll show you another one for some of the higher powered systems in a moment. Connection to this unit is relatively easy. It's got 3 small wires, a red one, yellow one, and a black one. The yellow is the one that goes toward the plus of the hydro system, designed for solar. That yellow would indicate sun. Red goes to plus of the battery. And then the black one, along with the negative from the hydro, goes to the negative of the battery, so that this device can measure the battery voltage. That's all there is to hooking it up. This charge control is actually designed for flush mounting in the wall of a motorhome, so it has no box or back on it. Available with it in the catalog is a box allowing you to wire this unit up and then insert it in the box and fasten it on the surface of a wall. This box makes it a little easier for mounting on a flat surface. Debbie actually had cut a hole and inserted hers flush in the wall, making a very neat installation, because behind the wall it was under a stairwell where the wiring could be done from behind. The tiny wires coming from this control are sufficient to carry the power up to 10 amps that it deals with, but they are not sufficient to carry it for the distance to the HydroPower unit. Also sold with it in the catalog is a terminal block. This is a block that you can stick a large wire in one side and the small wire on the other side, and there's a set screw to tighten down on each. Makes it very easy to put together those wires and install the unit to your hydro wire and to your batteries. And before connecting to the battery, the recommended fuse is a simple 30 amp cartridge fuse. The fuses themselves are available in hardware stores, and the holder, along with a spare fuse, is available in our catalog for $6. And finally, the batteries. Those that Debbie used were the surplus telephone company type. If you can find some that are in good condition, that haven't been abused or neglected, preferably right out of service, these are probably the most economical and largest battery you can buy for your money, as well as the longest life type. We don't directly deal with those batteries. It's a full job in itself, moving, obtaining, storing, testing that type of cell. Northwest Energy Storage, listed in our catalog, and possibly several other sources, have them and can ship them around the country. We do sell the smaller Trojan batteries. This is commonly known as a golf cart battery. It's a 6-volt cell. You use 2 of them in series together to get 12 volts. For hydropower, you really don't need quite such a large battery as you do for solar. Since it's being recharged completely every night, you're not going through 2 or 3 weeks of snow waiting for the sun to come back and charging periodically with the generator and that sort of thing. So a set of 2, 4, maybe even 6 of these golf cart batteries are also economical and adequate for a hydropower system. The L16 industrial battery shown in our catalog looks similar to that one, but it's a little bit taller. And they are heavier made, should last longer. They do cost more per amp hour, and many people use a set of 2, maybe 4, maybe 6 of those in their hydropower system. Mark Junkst built his home in the mountains of Montana. He has a very small stream, much smaller flow than Debbie's. He catches most of the flow from that stream, but is able to take it downhill much further elevation to gain a lot more pressure and spin the Harris Hydro to gain about twice the power that Debbie was producing on a much smaller amount of water at higher pressure.
It's really hard to find information on what to do.
So you just have a large area screen down there that catches everything?
Yeah, that's all that's on there now.
And that's all overflow going back down?
Yeah.
So your pipe just starts directly below the screen?
Yeah, right on the bottom of the tank there. It's about 2 inches across the bottom.
And then this is a bigger screen or just a,
No, that's just a set of... And I've got a clean out on this side that I can open up and flush all my dirt out.
Near the intake, Mark has some underground valves in the pipeline accessible by sticking a handle down through these pipes.
And a valve? Vent, 2 valves, one for the clean out and one for the hydro line.
The smaller pipe is a vent that allows air to enter the pipeline should he shut off the intake valve and drain it. So at the top, at the inlet, we have some sort of a pool of water which is drained in such a way that debris is restricted, maybe a rough amount of a screen there, but into a box or 50-gallon drum or some other construction that can have a large area screen put across it. Out of the other side of this comes your pipeline going downhill. Generally this would be a 6-inch line, and this one might be as small as a 2-inch. If you don't enjoy getting in to a barrel and dredging sand and rocks out by hand, you might also want to provide a discharge with some sort of a cover plate so that you can remove that once a year and flush out easily all of the sand and debris collected here back into the creek, which would be flowing along this way. This thing usually comes in near the center of the box as far as height. This screen, of course, covers across the whole box, and this thing would exit near the center. That way sand and debris in here will not go down your pipe or has some room to accumulate before it causes any problem. So the box or can has to be set in so that the natural water level of the creek is about halfway up, or actually 3/4 of the way up the height of the unit. Now, in the pipeline here, Mark had put a valve to shut off the water, and after the valve he had a little vent pipe coming up out of the ground so that if you shut this off, the suction here isn't going to collapse and damage your pipe, but air can be drawn in and the pipe can be emptied that way if you need to service it. A simpler way to do the same job is to have yourself a 90-degree, about a piece of pipe about a foot long with a 90-degree on it. You can reach down into this box and plug it onto here. Just plug it, cover it, and bring it out so that air will be drawn in and this pipe will be emptied at that point. Mark's pipeline is buried about 4 feet all the way down this path to his home underground. It's necessary in snow country to prevent freezing. The pipe can freeze starting from the outside in until you have only a pencil-thin stream of water inside of an ice-filled pipe, and the ice can eventually break the entire length of your pipe if it's not buried. So the pipe's about 5 feet under all the way down there.
Yeah, 4 to 5.
He's also using a Harris hydro system with a single nozzle because of his smaller flow of water, but it's buried in a trench about 5 feet down at the level of the pipeline in order not to have to come back to the surface and lose that 5 feet. His exit water is also buried, drained out of the trench and on down to rejoin the creek.
Running a 5.6 or 5.32 nozzle in it right now. Figure about 30 gallons a minute.
5/32?
Yeah.
You notice the slight whirring noise, of course. You notice the slight whirring noise of the wheel with the water hitting it, but in this underground type of enclosure it's not noticeable at all outside and certainly not audible from the house. He mentioned he has a 5/32 nozzle size for his single nozzle. The water passed by this nozzle is about 30 gallons per minute.
Running a 5.6 or 5.32 nozzle in it right now. Figure about 30 gallons a minute.
5/32?
Yeah.
30 gallons a minute on one nozzle.
Yeah.
And how many amps?
15 amps in the house.
So you're coming in, you got your one gate valve and the pressure gauge before it, and then what's that other vent?
That's just a a starter. I wanted someplace.
The several devices on the pipeline right before the hydro. This looks like about a 2-inch pipe, and he comes through a device where he can bleed air out of the line if he wants to. The next one is a pressure gauge, very handy to watch your pressure. If your power production should ever fall off, you want to know if it's an electrical problem or if your water pressure has dropped, which is the more common cause of reduced power due to clogging at the stream or some other problem in the pipeline. And then there is a gate valve to shut off the water in case you have to disconnect the hydro to change nozzle sizes or service it. I emphasize a gate valve. That's a type of valve that withdraws a gate completely out of the pipe. You don't want any kind of restriction in there. The pipe narrows down to a smaller size to enter the hydro, and finally inside the hydro, that 5/32 nozzle is intended to be the only restriction in the line. That's where the water picks up its speed and jets onto the wheel. Before that, you want the very minimum number of 90-degree elbows or restrictions of any kind in the pipeline. So here it is. Your water comes in this line, goes first to a T with a pressure gauge so you can see the pressure that you have in the line and make sure it's what you expect it to be, through a gate valve and into the hydro. Optionally, as he had provided, you might want a full size, another T here, and a full size line, same size as the one coming in, with a valve to shut it off that drains on out. This allows you to flush out debris from the line if there is any, and also to run the water very fast to flush out any air pockets that may be in the line. This, of course, should be very close, the gate valve to the line, so that this water in here that doesn't move will not freeze during the winter. Mark's underground installation was very good in preventing freezing in this part of the line, but of course you can have problems with flooding under there. He has a very good drain exiting the pit and going on downhill. Without that, the hydro unit could get flooded and perhaps damage the alternator during the winter or spring. On the face of the hydro, the meter is showing about 15 amperes being produced and sent to the house, much higher than most people use. Anything from 5 to 10 would be a typical Harris hydro installation in the Northwest. But they are capable of power up to 20, 30 amps or more, especially with the high output alternator. And the base is a culvert, or would you use...
Yeah, a piece of 13-inch pipe. It's 18 inches long, I believe.
And that's Don Harris's high output alternator.
Yeah. Put a little plexiglass window in the side. So access, so I can change knobs without taking it all apart.
That's good.
Yeah, it's real handy. You can't really see much inside there. I thought you would be able to. The water going around, you can't see much.
The two wires exit from the hydro, and at this point go to that same terminal block I showed you in the hydro pit in order to connect the more flexible wires to the heavier wires to go up the hill. Mark's pipeline is a 2-inch pipe, and it can, after the hydro, the water is collected into a drain and goes on down to the stream and exits here. You can see again the volume of water that's being used.
Been living here about 15 years. Most of those years have been on the solar power. We've got 6 panels up now. We just put this hydro in about, it's been about 6 months now. And everything's been working great. We've got more power than we've been used to. Haven't had the generator running since we started it. And so far so good.
What kind of things are you applying the power to?
Wash machines, vacuums, microwave. Family of 5, we do quite a bit of laundry.
You've got more power coming in here than most people. Do you use the special conserving lights, or you just regular equipment?
We did have the electronic light bulbs for a while over on solar conserving, but Anymore, we're kind of changing over to the incandescent bulbs because there's excess power and they're cheaper.
What size battery bank do you have, and what type are they?
It's the big telephone cells. They're 1,300 amp hours, something like that.
You've had those how long?
They're only, about 2 years old now. We just cycled out the Trojan 105s. We had those in there for 10 years. They finally gave up.
You got full 10 years out of those?
About that, yeah. Well, 7 to 10. It's right
Yeah,
in there.
most people get 5 or 6, but hydro is a lot easier on them.
Yeah.
And what do you got for an inverter now? It's the Trace?
Yeah, it's the Trace, what is that, 1512? It's the old one.
Oh, that was, yeah.
That's
So
the
you've
one
had
I got
that quite a while?
Yeah, 7 years.
You ever have any problem with
No
that?
problems with it. Been a great machine. We're talking upgrading it, maybe, just because it is getting old.
Mark is using a set of surplus telephone cells again. 210 amps for 8 hours. Watch how these are worded. When it says 210 amps for 8 hours, you multiply those numbers together, and this gives you 1680 ampere hours. If it said 210 amps at the 8-hour rate, that would be a set of batteries that's only 210 amp hours. Most of these are somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 amp hours. Each cell weighs about 300 pounds. The charge control in this case is a larger type, since more than 10 amperes is being generated by the hydro. This one is called an Enermaxer, and is the only other unit that we have that lends itself easily to hydropower. Unlike the Mark III and most other controls, the Enermaxer does not go in between the hydro and the battery to intercept power. It simply connects to the battery like any other power user in the house, and, as one lady put it, burns off the excess power. If the battery voltage reaches your preset maximum, this begins to turn on power into those heater-type resistors shown to the right, and they warm up and use up all the power coming in when the batteries are full. As soon as you turn on an appliance in the house, this will back off and give the power to that appliance. Or if you deplete power by using a lot of power, such as a washing machine, this will turn off altogether until the batteries are once again recharged.
I think that was 1,300, something like that.
That Enermaxer is pretty easy to adjust compared to most of those.
It's real nice. I like it. Can you expect it to fluctuate 2-3 tenths?
Yeah, well, as your battery voltage comes up a few tenths, that turns. Mark has also installed a separate meter to show the power coming in from the hydro, so you don't go out and actually look at the meter at the hydro. You have one in your power room, and below it on the wall is a diode. This prevents power from draining back from the battery to the hydro in case the water should fail. The diode also has a buzzer connected across it as an alarm. If the water stops for any reason, or the pipeline freezes or clogs up, or the alternator breaks, this will begin buzzing to inform him that the charging has stopped. And at this particular moment, he's receiving 14 amps of charge in from the hydro. Since nothing is being used in the house, almost all of that power is being dissipated by the Enermaxer control at this point. He also has a voltmeter, a digital voltmeter, to show the exact state of charge of the batteries. 14.5 is actually higher than you would normally want to run a set of batteries full time. Being way up in the mountains, Mark doesn't have a phone line to his house. You might be interested that he's using a radio phone link from his house to a link, the other end of the link, which is on a phone pole down at the road about 4 miles away.
It does go off. That's my phone set up there.
Why don't you
It's the repeater.
say something about that, because people are probably interested in.
That's a Rytron phone repeater. This is the remote 4 miles across the river. Goes via UHF across the river and then patches into the phone.
What's the total cost of setting that up about?
Yeah, we got about $3,000 into that. And then the hydro is about, we figured about $3,000 for that. To let them know this time. Yeah, regular house. Room like that.
I can't.
Heat all our water with makes a little noise, and that's about it. I think it needs pretty normal, I'd say.
Yeah.
Clients use.
A lot of people just put them in, bare fixtures over their countertop, their workspace, and it kind of makes a fixture by itself that way.
Yeah. That works well. I sure like the light out of those Oscars. Got an editing.
And the Trace 1500 watt inverter, the predecessor of the present 2000 watt unit, is what converts the battery power to AC power for all the appliances in Mark's home. To review the statistics for this installation, the pipeline is a total of 1,300 feet in length from the intake where he had his screens down to the hydro unit. In that length, the elevation drop is 112 feet. Now, if you divide 112 by 2.2, you would get 51 pounds of pressure. However, because of friction inside the 2-inch pipe as the water flows at a rate of 30 gallons per minute, his operating pressure is only 42 pounds at the hydro unit, quite sufficient to give him a large charge rate of almost 15 amperes. In contrast, our first example back at Debbie's home, the pickup point was only 20 feet above the hydro location. There was a larger pipe and more water flowing going into all 4 nozzles. With 20 feet of drop, you only have about 9 pounds of pressure at the bottom of the line, again dividing by 2.2, resulting in 5 amperes charge rate for Debbie, about 1/3 of what the second example had. However, the second example was almost all surplus. While we were there, the regulator was dissipating almost all the charge because he wasn't able to use it all. So this still gives quite a comfortable living. Let's talk for a moment about an easy way to measure this elevation change on your property. You don't need to get out there with surveyor's transits or hoses full of water and do fancy balancing act. The easiest way I've found is with a site level. This is a very simple unit, not perhaps accurate enough to build a building with, but quite accurate enough to get the number of feet of drop in your site within 3 or 4%, I think, if you do it carefully. This is a unit that you look through starting at the bottom and just walk up the trail once from the bottom of your hydro site to the top, and you can get a very sufficiently accurate idea of the height. This site has a level in it that allows you to see a spot ahead of you that is the same height as your eye. Now, most people's eye is about 5 feet off the ground. Mine is, so it's within a few inches, so we use 5 feet as a good round number. As you sight ahead, you'll spot a point on the trail going from the bottom to the top. A spot ahead of you uphill on the trail, which is 5 feet higher than the spot where you're standing. So you pick out a twig or a rock or some landmark there that is at that point, walk up there, stand at that point, and do it again. The next spot you sight will be 10 feet higher than where you started. And again, 15, 20, 25, 30, and so on. The steeper the land is, the shorter the distance. If it's not very steep, you have to go a much longer distance to get the 5 feet. It helps to have a helper that can go up and stand there, and you say, okay, right there, and they wait while you catch up and then do it again. By the time you get to the top, even if it's 100, 150 feet, you've got a pretty accurate idea of the height by walking it out just once. And it doesn't matter which route you take. If this is the creek bed and it's really hard to get through, you can take a logging road or a trail. As long as it goes from the bottom to the same location at the top, the elevation difference will measure the same, of course. Looking through the site, this is roughly what you'll see. It's difficult to focus the camera on both sides, but on the right-hand side you see a hairline there, and on the left-hand side there's actually a green level with a bubble. You get the bubble lined up with the horizontal line, and that means that the site is at that point looking horizontal and at a spot exactly level with your eye. This particular site only costs $15, and in fact we have a whole collection of them here. We will loan one to you for free. You can measure your land and send it back. If, as happens to many people, you decide it's very useful and you'd like to keep it, just send back $15 instead. But it is a free loan item to let you get set up and figure out the characteristics of your site for hydropower. Doug and Kathy Scheffler built a log home along the Moye River in Idaho. They have all the comforts you could want, including a hot tub and satellite TV. The house is in an ideal site at the base of a rather steep cliff with a small creek cascading all the way down. Up at the very top of the pipeline, the intake is at a deeper pool where the pipe can be submerged in an area of ample water depth. There's a screen at the very start of the intake pipe, again to keep out leaves and gravel. From there, a short, larger pipe goes through an earth water retaining system into a simple 50-gallon drum that's been buried to be just about equal to the height of the water. Inside the drum is the second screen that actually does the real job of filtering, keeping things from going into the pipeline. To the rear you see the overflow, which is draining the extra water out that doesn't go down the smaller pipeline. On the left, a 2-inch pipe starts and goes down the hill all the way to the house. You see the flange bolted to the barrel, not at the bottom, but near the bottom, to prevent stones and sand from going down the pipe. It's bolted right to the tank. A 50-gallon drum is soft enough that when you bolt up a solid flange to it with some silicone seal caulk underneath, you get a good seal, and your pipe can take off right from the side of the drum. Down at the house, in a shed against the back of the house, is the hydro generator itself. It's an older type unit, no longer made. We used to make these here at Backwoods Solar. Exactly the same plan, a Pelton wheel inside with an automobile alternator spun by the single jet of water at higher pressure. Here again, a large set of telephone cells, not necessary with hydropower to have batteries this large, but they are often more economical and longer lasting than the smaller cells. So they're a very desirable type of battery. 6 cells, 6 2-volt cells to make 12 volts. How often do you have to clean that screen?
Oh, well, I cleaned it a couple of times last fall, and then, let's see, 3 times this spring.
The one inside the barrel?
No, the one on the outside.
Okay, the inside one stays pretty clean?
Yeah.
We did that. When did we do that? Was it last fall you did that?
Yeah, last October.
Took it all out.
Yeah, I
Because
cleaned the whole barrel out.
We hadn't done that the year before, and we were sorry all winter because it was constantly getting things coming through.
Yeah.
And, getting to the...
But that's one of the problems with an open stream like that. You've got leaves and stuff in the fall of the year, and in the spring you have a certain amount of leaves and needles and stuff, and I don't know how you would You know, there's just almost no way that you just have to, that's just maintenance you have to do to keep it going. But it hasn't been bad. My gosh, we've run since October
Yeah, with that.
without a bit of trouble.
How about the pipe? I saw you had some of it wrapped with insulation and some of it wasn't.
Well, I done that on the lower end, you know, when we first put it in, you know. But I figured out when I got way up there, the pressure I had, which we had some pretty cold weather last winter. What the heck was it? It got about 20 below, wasn't it? For a few days.
And it never had any.
You know, but you see, I've got the system, Steve. I've got so much pressure and whatnot, and from I've got my water that comes to the house comes around from there and underneath the house, and I brought it around, and I've got a buried line that goes out here to the edge of the river, and I dug a little hole there and covered it over, so I got water running continuously all the time.
So in addition to what goes through the unit.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
So you know, it's the water is running constantly. So I'm sure that the only way we happen to have some really extreme cold weather that would freeze it up. You know.
Well, year before, not this winter, but last winter we had, you know, that, what, was it 2 or 3 weeks when we had that weather from Alaska? Of sub-zero weather. And we didn't even have it up as high as we have it now. We had it down further. And it never froze up on us. We didn't have any trouble with it at all.
But I had a deuce of a time with it because I never cleaned the needles out of the barrel, you see, and I was scared to shut it off because if I shut it off, well, I knew damn well it would freeze up before I could get it cleaned, you know, because it was so extremely cold there. So about every other day I was out here cleaning out my faucets deal, you know, where I had the underground drain. Oh, Jimmy, it was. But you just got to learn those things, boy. If you're prepared ahead of time, you know what I mean. If you got it right to begin with, you don't have no problem. But
it's been a neat system, and we keep adding things. We think, well, we can't do this. Oh, we can have this. Oh, we can have that. And I run irons, and we run a lot of electrical appliances in the kitchen, blender, and a high-powered blender too. Plus our DC lights.
The Acme juicer runs on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
I have one of those Vegenetic. Show you. We have the
Sidewinder.
juicer, and we have this, Sidewinder by the mix. We have a toaster. We're going to get a microwave oven. And we have a meat grinder. A lot of things, really. I think what made the difference is when we got those telephone batteries. You know,
and we run our PA system, you know, with our music. In fact, we're thinking about having maybe a little festival here this summer, and we'll just set up on the porch here. And
starring Doug and Kathy, huh?
we could fill the canyon with music and freak them neighbors out up above us up here.
Yeah.
Wonder where it's coming from.
Scare away the geese, huh?
Yeah.
I recently went to the big energy fair at Wisconsin with Don Harris, the maker of the Harris Hydro unit. At that fair we both gave classes, and I taped some of Don's class talking about his units and site selection and installation. We'll take a look at some of that, and then a couple of different type of hydro systems, one that has only about 15 feet of fall, much higher volume, a different type of turbine at the end, and a very well done unit which is in a powerhouse by itself with the batteries and inverter, all the electronic stuff outside of the residence. Here is Don Harris.
Okay, hydro. If you have a creek, if you have flowing water, it can be, but isn't necessarily the cheapest form of power. Basically what you're looking at for hydro potential is simple. You're taking the power out of falling water, and there are two components in that. You have the amount of distance that the water drops. You're assuming that you're taking the water from someplace, putting it in a pipe, building up pressure, and running it through a turbine. You have the physical distance that it drops, and you have the amount of water that is flowing through the turbine. You multiply those two together and you have the available power. For, if you're interested, the potential in watts available with no losses is the feet that the water drops times the gallons per minute divided by 5.3. Now, Richard in the beginning covered the first half of what you always have to do. You have to look at what you're doing, how you want to live, and how much power you need. This is for a standalone system. If you're talking about a payback system where you're going into the grid, it's altogether different. Then it's economic and not life necessity. When you're looking for your potential, those are the basic components: head, drop in water, and flow. The reality, of course, is that the head is easy to determine. The first thing that you want to look at, that's straightforward. There are a couple of ways of measuring that. If you're in open country, where you don't have too many trees and it's reasonably flat, more open than flat, you can use essentially a surveying technique. If you have a transit, that's fine. A sight level is an intermediate device. You look through it and there's a bubble in it, and you level it up, you see the bubble, that means it's level. You cut a stick of a given length, usually convenient length, 5 feet. It's something like that. It's an easy, simple number that's close to your eye length. Put it in the ground, line, this works best with 2 people. Line the sight level up, look through it, and have another person walk up to where you're looking at the soles of their feet. You know then that that is the length of the pole above where the pole is on the ground. You mark that down, move the pole up to where the person's soles of their feet were. Do this in incremental steps until you've gone from where the turbine is to be sited to where you are going to take the water. I should step back up. Of course, you have to determine where you can get the water and where you can put the turbine. When you do this, this will tell you what your head is. The flow, now the flow is more complex. It's much like wind data. It isn't going to change day to day, most likely, but it will, at least where I come from, change dramatically by season, and it will also change dramatically over cycles of 10, 20, 30 years. We're in a drought now, and I'm faced with having to run a generator for the first time in 10 years because it just simply isn't raining as much. We had an earthquake. The earthquake changed the dynamic of the water. People's springs and creeks dried up high. People down low got more water. But it's slowly coming back to what it was before the earthquake. There are long-term things that affect that. So you have to take a long-term perspective in establishing what your minimum flow is. And that is, of course, the critical figure, especially in a standalone system. If it's a payback system, again, it's an economic consideration, but it isn't an absolute consideration. And it doesn't mean that if it drops to too low or drops to 0 that it isn't worth doing. Because like Mick said, there are a lot of things. In California, we have a lot of sun in the summer when we don't have much water, and vice versa. And it makes sense to do a hybrid system of wind, water, or sun. There is another consideration with water that you don't have so much with solar or with wind, and that is environmental impact. You can cover your roof and an awful lot of space with solar panels, and it isn't going to make much difference. You can stick a lot of windmills up, and you're going to have very little effect in the broader scheme of things on the environment. But you can dry a creek up and kill all the fish in it, and that is something which we do not want and can't do. So at the driest time of the year in particular, you do not want to take enough of the water out of the creek to make a significant difference in the life forms. You can't generalize. There's no percentage figure that can be said, because a creek that dries up naturally, you can take a much higher percentage toward the end of it out and have little impact, because it is used, the ecosystem is used to drying up, which means that it goes aerobic, anaerobic, aerobic, anaerobic. If you have a creek that doesn't dry up, it has a different biological arrangement, and you don't want to push it close to drying up, and consequently you have to leave a larger percentage of the water. And it's different from one place to another. You really would have to talk to the people in the universities or the environmental people in the area to have a good analysis of this. That factor is probably understressed. We know what we've done with some of the big hydro systems and some of the dams. In California, we've killed fish runs and salmon. Pollution probably more than hydro, but even so, hydros have a big impact. We don't want to do it. We don't want to be responsible for doing it with small renewable energy. So that factor is probably one of the primary considerations. Another thing that is a little bit more emphasized with water than with either wind or sun are distances. 10 years ago, when we essentially were doing 12 volt almost exclusively, the distance from the turbine to the house was a major problem. In California, where I come from, we have feast and famine with water. We have floods. And in steep country, it often turns out that the turbine, in order to get sufficient head, needs to be down near the creek. Well, you don't probably want to live in a swamp anyway, and if you did, you might lose your house. And so, of necessity, the house has to be some distance from the turbine. That can be a big factor in deciding the feasibility of a hydro system. It is not so true now as it was 10 years ago. More people are using AC inverted power. And as a consequence, you're, instead of using 12 volt, there are commonly available inverters that are 12, 24, and 48 volt. The square law, again, we don't want to get too technical, but the square law applies to transmitting power over distance. Every time you double the voltage, you can go 4 times as far with the power with the same loss. What that means is a 24 volt system, you can go 4 times as far as a 12. Do it other ways. We can run high voltage out of the turbine and step it down with the batteries. That's tricky, it's expensive, and it has to be done very carefully because of the risk involved in the voltages. The other thing in siting that is probably the single biggest cost factor is the length of pipe that you have to use in order to get your head. When you were measuring to see how much drop you had, you also wanted to measure, if you were using 300-foot lengths of, for instance, hose, you want to note how many times you did it so that you know what that pipe length run is. There are a lot of hydro sites that in theory are practical, but if you only have 20 feet of drop, and in order to get an adequate amount of power, you need 150 gallons a minute. If you have to go 2,000 feet to get that, in order to not lose, every time you run water through a pipe, there is some power lost in friction. It's very much like electricity being pushed through a wire. And it gets away from you if it's a low head system with a slow gradient, and it's a long way, the pipe has to be very large, and the pipe costs, I would say on the average system that I install, the pipe cost is probably the largest single factor, probably by a factor of 2 over anything else in the turbine. If you have a waterfall in your backyard, it's not a consideration. If you have 20 feet of head and a quarter mile of pipe, you probably have to put in an 8-inch pipe in order to make the system work, and it may not be worth it. So that is a major consideration. With regard to costing a battery system on a hydro, you need a smaller battery bank. Its costs are lower because you're feeding the system all the time, 24 hours a day. Wind and sun is relatively predictable and off and on, day and night. Wind, that's the magic, what Nick was talking about. It can be, in California, I think it's quite seasonal. Here it may be more uniform. Water, of course, like I said, it can be very seasonal. I guess in this part of the country, your rains are fairly uniform. The creeks don't come up and go down. In California, a lot of them dry up in the summer. And you have to consider that for systems.
Well, Don Harris Hydro, the unit we've seen in all the examples so far, is good for the higher amounts of pressure with smaller quantities of water, practically from about 40 feet or 30 feet up to 100 or 200 feet, with quantities from 20 gallons per minute up to 80 or 100 gallons per minute, with the largest of all 4 nozzles operating. There is one other type of hydro that we have installed that takes the range down a little bit to the lower head applications. typically around 20 feet of operation where you only have 8 or 9 pounds pressure, down to maybe 10 feet if you have plenty of water, higher volume of water. This is the intake system for one of the higher volume units using a larger pipe. This used to be a swampy area with a couple of 50-gallon drums buried for the water intake and filtering. These folks hired a contractor who does irrigation pumping systems to come in and put a water retaining system to make a very small pond, complete with a gate to release it so that silt accumulation behind the wall can be flushed out. This is a view of the downhill side of that gate. The gate can be opened and closed manually by turning this wheel, which turns a threaded rod and raises the metal plate. When this picture was taken, the gate had just been closed and the reservoir was only beginning to fill. The actual intake to the filter and pipe system is down in the corner. It's a round can-like screen that is set over a structure on top of the intake of the pipe. It can be easily fished out, lifted for cleaning with a hooked stick. Directly on the other side of the wall are two filters, again drums set in the ground, only these with neat stainless steel covers at ground level. Only one would have been required for this job, except that the original system had two filters in there, so the man rehabilitating it simply improved on them both, leaving them in place. Inside of each can is a screen filter which is completely underwater when the reservoir has filled and catches all the sediment and is easily removed for cleaning. Since the drop in this system is only 18 or 20 feet, the pressure available is only about 8.5 pounds. A large 6-inch pipe is used. In the powerhouse end, the first thing you come to is a gate valve with the lever at the right side of the picture to shut off the water where it first enters the room for servicing the plumbing. Then, as usual, a pressure gauge to verify the operation of the pipe and that nothing is clogging it. Here, a little different type of turbine by Paul Cunningham of Canada. This has 4 nozzles, but they come in at an angle and go through a torque converter turbine rather than jetting against a solid Pelton wheel. The generator is a 3-phase AC motor, which generates about 100, somewhere between 100 and 200 volts AC at random frequency for easier transmission to the house on small wires. At the house, it's transformed down to battery charging voltage and changed into DC with diodes. If you don't have a high voltage type generator, 3 transformers like these can step up automotive generators to high voltage for long distance transmission. In the house, another 3 transformers bring the voltage back down to 15 or 18 volts, suitable for charging 12-volt batteries. Another feature that's different in this situation from the other ones we saw is that this house is over 1,000 feet away from the hydro, and the power at high voltage is transported to the house on 10-gauge Romex, a very low-cost buried wire. The rest of the charge control system is very similar to the other hydros or solar. For even lower heads yet, as low as 8 feet down to 4 feet, a unit like this can be used. The water enters at the top, goes through a boat-like propeller inside, and exits at the bottom after spinning the propeller. The propeller comes out the top, and a pulley and belt can turn the alternator from there. These units are very hard to find, and generally the more water you handle, the more expensive the hardware is. This one is a surplus item. We don't normally have them, but occasionally can find one like this. Well, if you're lucky enough to have a site for HydroPower, it's the first choice, the best thing you can use. If you don't, like 99 out of 100 people we deal with, solar power is the other option. We have a videotape that goes through the same type of tour that this one has, explaining the uses of solar power. It goes in more detail as to the balance of the system, the inverter and the batteries and so on, and might even be applicable to your needs if you're installing hydro. Get in touch with us if you need more information or want to visit one of these sites nearby. We can arrange for that too.